thank you so much for taking a minute out. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting into Sanctuary.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's begin at the top. How did you two come together? How did this musical duo happen?
Well, we started out meeting by chance at a jam session in Natick, Massachusetts, while we were both still in high school, and just kind of hit it off and struck up a friendship, played together a little bit in the context of that jam session. We grew up in towns nearby each other in the suburbs west of Boston. And then stayed in touch over the years, did a little bit of playing on school breaks and things like that. And it was really when we both found ourselves teaching at Berklee College of Music that we began working together more regularly, with an eye or an ear toward our original music. And so that led to our first record called United, which came out in 2017, which was a mix of original compositions and covers that we enjoyed performing together and had kind of forged an artistic identity around. With Sanctuary, the idea was, let's co-compose a bunch of music. Let's really, from the very start, purposefully write for each other and for this record and try to come up with some sort of cohesive statement.
So how does it work? What's the chemistry? What is it? I mean, obviously, when you have a musical union or a band or a collective, there's got to be some level of chemistry that keeps it going and flowing and makes it creatively viable. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jason and Jason Yeager. I know it's confusing to have two Jasons in a band, let alone also having Jason Palmer on the record, three Jasons. We are working towards getting more Jasons, but that'll be in the future. But yeah, no. So Yeager and myself, I feel like kind of we've been kindred spirits musically for many years, and have a shared vision of kind of like of it. We have a shared vision of where we want to take music and how we want to like what things that we like and how we want to present it. We have similar aesthetics and similar backgrounds with strong roots in jazz and blues, but also have we're interested in music all around the world, rhythms all around the world, and how we can incorporate those into a contemporary jazz setting. So our aesthetics are very in line of like how we of things that we like, but at the same time we also take each other's compositions when like if Jason sends me the start or the idea, a seed of a composition, and then I'll take it in a different direction, then he'll bring it in another direction, and it always works out. But it having the two heads really brings some new flavors together, and the compositions go in interesting directions. But I think our shared vision and shared trust in each other as musicians and composers helps us to kind of see songs through and get them to the finish line. And I'm always thrilled at what comes out.
Yeah, and I would say trust is a big thing because we play a lot of duo together, just violin and piano. And whenever you're playing duo, especially in improvised music or some kind of quote unquote jazz setting, when it's duo, there has to be a lot of trust because there's only one other person there to catch you if you fall, so to speak. In a band like a quartet, quintet, what this Sanctuary is mostly quintet, there's amazing bass player and drummer, in this case, Greg Loafman and Mike Connors, respectively. They're there to kind of set the foundation. They're also creative voices within the ensemble, but they really help set the template. When it's just me and Jason Anick playing duo, there's no net. We have to really trust each other that the other person is going to take care of business, and we've always had that trust. We also have a shared background in classical music, like we both started in classical study on our instruments, European classical music. And I think we have a love for that music, but it also gives us a little bit of a common language, melodically, orchestrationally, compositionally. And then we sort of fall in the cracks. Like I think both of us have a love for the jazz tradition and sort of classic all the way from the very beginnings in New Orleans up through the 60s Blue Note records. We have a love for that whole first half of the jazz canon, but we also have a love for what's happening today and artists who are consistently pushing beyond the boundaries of what's considered jazz. And so Jason Anick came up with this term, jazz without borders, and I think that kind of describes what we pursue in our music as well.
Yeah, 100%.
So speaking of net, you both come in with your own collective history of musicians and genres that you guys dig from the jazz idiom. But what is it that really you talk about together that are influences that may seep into what you do? Because, when you go in and do the creative process, there's a combination of things. It's a snapshot in time. Like you said, it's compositions you're making for each other. But at the end of the day, it's all about these musical histories that we have floating through our brains. So what have been those influences on both of you that have impelled your creative process?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So when you hear a record of original music that's that featuring myself and Jason Yeager, you are hearing a big history, a lineage. I mean, I'm even bringing in some roots and fiddle music that I learned from my dad, as well as Jason mentioning from my classical training through conservatory, and um, as well as our love for like Wayne Shorter, which is one of the reasons, as well as his passing recently, to pay tribute to him. And we also feature, we feature a Chopin piece um, in it as well, which is a piece really close to my heart. That was one that my brother introduced to me, who was a pianist. Um, and yeah, I mean, of course, as a jazz violinist, there's always going to be a hint of Stefan Grappelli in there, but I actually released a Grappelli tribute album earlier in the year, so I kind of got that out of my system. So I was able to kind of, I'm pursuing in on my original music a unique voice, but of course there'll always be a sprinkling of some of the violinists before me, Jean-Luc Ponty, um, Stefan Grappelli. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, certainly touchstones like Miles Davis, Wayne Shorter, Charlie Parker, and then on the piano side, people like Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, Keith Jarrett, more contemporary voices like Fred Hirsch and Brad Meldau are also artists that I've admired for quite some time and studied their music, and I think that comes out. And then there's something within the individual that amalgamates it all in a unique way that when it comes out the other side as a composition or as an improvisation on a tune, you may or may not recognize some of the influences. And certainly I am influenced by Jason Anick. Like I think we influence each other. And as he was saying, when we collaborate on a composition, we usually one of us starts the piece and sends it to the other person. The other person works on it a while and sends it back. And we do that like a few times over email, in fact, because we live in different states. We're not like right nearby each other. So we do that a few times before we get together in one room and play it together live. And it's always super surprising and fun to hear the twists and turns that each composition has taken before we've even gotten to play it. And I think, but I think there's a sense that we're influencing each other. It's almost like, some kind of more creative version of the game telephone where you're whispering something to the other person. It takes on a life of its own and transforms with each iteration.
So at the end of the day, what are you ultimately hoping the listener gets from this project?
Well, one of the themes when we started writing the music for this record, it was in 2019, I believe, maybe even 2018, some of it. The project got a little bit sidetracked by the pandemic and other work and family obligations that both entered our lives. When we started writing the music, and pretty much throughout the entire process, we were thinking about what is a sanctuary in a world marked by chaos, in a world marked by massive levels of refugees in places from the Middle East to Latin America, all over the world. And we were reading, articles in the news about various crises around the globe and thinking about, how to portray that that's kind of conflict and that kind of disaster through music. But not only the disaster part, but what ways in which both on a very like crisis oriented level that you see in those conflicts, but also in our much more comfortable lives here in the United States, when things are upsetting or going really wrong. Where do we look for sanctuary? How do we find sanctuary? And so a lot of the music kind of treads that line between the sublime and the chaotic, I would say, kind of like working its way back in between those two areas, and how music for us is ultimately the sanctuary that we find in a world that is so at times discouraging and full of despair. So we hope there's some sense of catharsis when listening to it.
Yeah. So what I know you guys are separated by states, you're not in close proximities, but what are you doing for live shows? What do you do for promoting, getting together, presenting this to audiences?
Yeah, so we just had a string of some nice CD releases. We played Regatta Bar in Boston a couple months back, which was wonderful. And for that, we actually were able to get all the special guests off on the album to join us. So that was a very special night. And then we had a pretty much sold out show at Birdland in New York. So that was wonderful. And then Jason Yeager just recently had a baby. So we are planning to play some more shows, in 2025. What is next
That
year?
is the next year. Yeah.
Yeah, that is.
2025.
It all blends together.
Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna plan on continuing to promote the album through concerts in the coming year once things quiet down in Yeager's family world.
Yeah, we really got from both audiences, we got really positive responses to the music in a live setting. And it was really a joy to play it live because although some of the pieces we did get to play live in 2019 and very early 2020, once the pandemic hit, this project was, of course, sidelined by that. We actually had a date in the studio booked for April 2020 that we had to stop. And ultimately, because it was delayed by a little over 3 years when we actually recorded it in May 2023, the pieces kept evolving and changing and developing little by little. And so we haven't really played a lot of the music live in the fully fledged form that you hear on the album. And it was really gratifying to get to present that music for audiences and feel them react to it and respond to it in such a strong way. So we're looking forward to bringing it to more cities in the United States, and who knows, maybe abroad in 2025, 2026.
But to be able to sell out one of the more premier jazz venues on the planet for Birdland, and mentioning the pandemic, I know we're traveling past that. It's getting in the rearview mirror. But I mean, that was such a big period of tumult for musicians that had
No
nothing going
kidding.
on. Do you still find yourself on stage going, wow, we're back, it's happening? Has that shine worn off?
You know, how to, I will say to a certain extent, the shine has worn off a little bit because, at least speaking for myself, and I maybe Jason and I can relate. I feel like for the last maybe two plus years, performances have been more regular and less in danger of being canceled because of now occasionally a band member can get COVID. Obviously, that still happens and that will throw a wrinkle into things, but whole events aren't being canceled. So, however, I like to remind myself so I don't lose that shine of like, oh my God, we're back in person playing. I try to remind myself, especially, and this never happens when I'm playing with Jason Anick, but especially on the gigs that I'm on where maybe it's not my favorite musical environment or my favorite venue. So this does not apply to Birdland. This does not apply to playing with Jason Anick, but just, more run of the mill gigs that are still gratifying musically, but maybe not my bread and butter, so to speak. I try to remind myself that, hey, this is pretty miraculous that we're in a room with other human beings communicating through this medium of music. And I try not to lose sight of how precious that is, because boy, I mean, were we ever reminded how precious that is during the pandemic. And I agree with you. I think the fact of the pandemic also spurred us on to continue writing and developing these arrangements. That's actually when we decided to develop an arrangement, which is almost a recomposition of Chopin's Raindrop Prelude. That was originally not going to be on the record for the first recording session in 2020. That session that got canceled. And then during the pandemic, we sort of revisited everything, including adding a couple of these pieces that I think express some of what we were feeling in isolation and in lockdown and the pathos of dealing with that.
So if anyone wants to pick up a copy of this, the best way would be Bandcamp, correct?
Yep, Bandcamp is great. You can also get it from us directly at a show if you do happen to come hear us play. But Bandcamp is wonderful. You can buy a hard copy from us in person or through our websites if you want to reach out that way. And of course, it's available digitally all over wherever you get your music.
Yeah, and it was on Sunnyside Records, so you can visit their catalog as well and see it there.
Okay. Jason Yeager, you had a little bit of time with one of my favorite people on the planet, Mr. Daniel Bennett.
Yes.
Yeah. He came through Kansas City. He presented Mr. Bennett's Mind at the little suburb here called Olathe. And so I caught him this summer, and I've been
nice.
for years. So yeah, anyway.
That's great.
Yeah, you guys are class.
Yeah. Yep. I've played on a couple of his records and worked with him on and off in the city, so that's great.
Right on. Well, gentlemen, I know that when we catch up, it's usually way after the fact that the album's been out and you're moving on to new things. So have a wonderful holiday season and a great 2025. And hopefully at some point you can swing through Kansas City. We got a good sports team. We got good plates and meats, whatever you need.
We would love that.
That sounds wonderful.
We'd help you out. So
thank you so much. Happy holidays to you and yours as well.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Right on.